The morning began like any other in Bagram Air Base. Dry wind scraping across the tarmac, engines howling in the distance, and soldiers moving in that hurried, wordless rhythm that came with years of war. Lieutenant Commander Alyssa Hawke Brennan walked across the airfield with her flight helmet tucked under her arm, boots thudding against concrete that still shimmered with the night's heat. Her eyes were sharp, the kind that saw everything, yet revealed nothing. She wasn't just a pilot. She was a Navy SEAL, one of the few who'd ever worn both wings and trident. And today's mission, at least on paper, was simple. A routine equipment transport from Bagram to a remote outpost near the Afghan-Pakistani border. A straight flight through familiar airspace. No expected hostiles. No classified cargo, just surveillance components and a few sealed crates marked with serials even she didn't bother to read. She'd done this 100 times. Still, habits carved in combat never left her. As she approached the C-27 Spartan, she did what she always did, a slow walk around the aircraft, eyes and hands scanning every detail. The hydraulic lines, the gear tires, the tail fins. She ran a gloved hand across a hairline crack in the left wing, frowned slightly, then smiled to herself. Old birds got personality, she murmured. Her co-pilot, Petty Officer Reed Tully, appeared behind her, chewing on a protein bar, helmet dangling from his hand. "Morning, Mom. Command says the weather's clear all the way." "Yeah?" she replied, still studying the plane. "Clear skies usually mean bad luck." Reed chuckled, thinking she was joking. But Alyssa rarely joked before a flight. At 0600 hours, the engine started with a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the cockpit. Dust rose in twisting clouds behind the spinning propellers. She adjusted her headset, voice crisp over the comm. "Bagram Control. This is Raven 7-1, requesting takeoff clearance." Raven 7-1, cleared to runway 09. "Safe travels, Commander." The plane taxied forward, heavy with fuel and equipment. As it lifted into the sky, the rising sun bled across the horizon, painting the mountains gold. Alicia leaned slightly in her seat, eyes scanning the open world ahead, jagged ridges, endless sand, and a thin blue line of sky. She felt most alive in these moments, not because she loved danger, but because she respected it. "Hard to believe this place used to be a minefield," Reed said, glancing out the window. Alicia smirked. "Still is. Just better organized now." The first half hour passed in near silence. Reed handled the instruments while Alyssa adjusted trim, monitoring altitude and wind drift. Every few minutes, she would look down at her worn wristband, a faded piece of parachute cord, braided tight. It had belonged to her late mentor, Captain Dean Harlow, the man who'd trained her when everyone else said women didn't belong in SEAL aviation. He'd died in a crash 7 years ago during a mission no one would officially talk about. She wore the band as both reminder and warning. The sky forgives no one. "Raven 7-1, this is Outpost Lima. Confirm ETA?" Reed responded, "Copy, Lima. ETA 20 minutes. All normal. No tension in the voices. No hint of what was waiting ahead. What Alyssa didn't know was that 200 miles to the southeast, in the Shamal Valley, a team of insurgents was already preparing. Their leader, a former Soviet-trained tactician known only as Rashid Al-Qadir, had spent months studying American flight paths, waiting for a perfect opportunity. He'd paid villagers to report movements, bribed local radio operators, even planted listening devices near fuel depots. His goal wasn't just to shoot down a plane, it was to humiliate the United States by capturing one of its elite pilots alive. And today, his scouts had spotted a C-27 matching Alyssa's aircraft, flying the corridor he'd been watching for weeks. The ambush plan was simple but deadly. portable anti-air systems positioned along the ridgeline, 2 modified drones equipped with heat sensors to track movement, and a sniper team with American rifles captured from old convoys. Rashid's orders were clear: cripple the aircraft, force it down, take survivors. Back in the cockpit, Alyssa adjusted altitude, feeling a slight headwind push against them. She noticed faint interference on her radar, small dots flickering at 10 o'clock, too distant to identify. "Reed, you seeing that?" He squinted at the screen. "Could be weather or sensor reflection." She murmured. "Or someone testing our nerves." Reed grinned nervously. "You always assume the worst?" "Assuming the worst keeps you alive." The hum of the engines deepened. Outside, the horizon stretched endlessly, but something felt off. A heaviness in the air, a strange silence over the radio. Alyssa checked her com again. Static. She tried a second channel. More static. Her instincts sharpened. She'd flown combat in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and she'd learned to trust the moments when everything felt too quiet. "Reed," she said, "run a diagnostics check. I want radar integrity confirmed." As he began typing commands, a single chirp echoed on the radar. One blip, then another, both moving fast. "Contact, 2 signatures, range 15 miles and closing." Alyssa straightened. "That's no weather." Before Reed could reply, a low metallic beep screamed from the threat detector. Missile lock. Her heart spiked, but her voice stayed calm. "Countermeasures now." Reed slammed the switch. Flares erupted from the sides of the plane, trailing smoke and fire. The world outside flashed orange. Then a thunderclap. A rocket streaked past the left wing, missing by barely 2 meters. The blast rocked the Spartan, shaking every rivet. Warning lights lit up across the panel. Reed cursed, hands flying over controls. Alyssa gripped the yoke tight. "Hang on." She pushed the plane into a steep right roll, diving for lower altitude. The air screamed around them. The second missile whooshed overhead, detonating in a burst of flame. The cockpit filled with warning tones. Hydraulics critical. Engine 2 unstable. Fuel pressure dropping. Reed yelled. "They're firing from the ridges." "I see them," Alyssa barked, glancing out the window. Flashes of light on the mountains. The telltale glint of launch tubes. In seconds, what had been a routine delivery became a desperate fight for survival. The aircraft dipped into a valley, Alyssa using the terrain as cover. "If we stay low, they lose line of sight," she said through gritted teeth. Reed nodded, pale but focused. "Should we call for backup?" "Already trying." She switched frequencies, her voice steady despite the chaos. "This is Raven 7-1, under fire, grid 259er. Multiple hostiles. Requesting immediate support." Only static answered back. Another flash. Another missile screamed toward them. Alyssa jerked the plane into a barrel roll, the fuselage groaning in protest. The warhead exploded below them, sending shockwaves that nearly flipped the aircraft. Dust and smoke blasted through the vents. Her pulse thundered in her ears. But she didn't panic. SEALs weren't trained to panic. They were trained to endure. "Reed," she said, strapping tight. "This ride's about to get ugly." He stared at her, terrified, but trusting. "How ugly?" She gave a small, humorless grin. "Let's just say, the kind they don't write manuals for." As she banked hard to the east, the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the valley into shadow. Her altimeter spun wildly. But in that chaos, something sparked in her eyes, that same fearless calm that had carried her through every impossible mission before. She was no longer flying by protocol. She was flying by instinct and by will. The trap was sprung. The ambush had begun. But what her enemies didn't know was that they hadn't just cornered a pilot. They'd just picked a fight with a Navy SEAL who refused to fall. The plane shuddered as it leveled out low over the valley floor. Dust and smoke trailed behind like torn fabric across the sky. Alyssa steadied the yoke with both hands, knuckles white, jaw set. Reed coughed, clearing his visor of soot. The air in the cockpit stank of burned metal and oil. Engine 2's losing compression. Reed shouted. "I see it," Alyssa snapped back. "We keep it under 50% power, she'll hold." Outside, the desert spread in endless brown folds, ridges rising like teeth. Somewhere up there, men with launchers were moving to intercept their new flight path. The altimeter ticked lower 200 feet, 180, 160. Any lower, and they'd scrape the ground. Any higher, they'd be visible targets again. Reed adjusted the comms panel, his fingers trembling. Still no signal from command. Alyssa frowned. "That's not possible. The relay satellites cover this corridor. It's dead across every frequency," he said. "Like someone's jamming us." That word jamming hit her harder than the explosions had. She'd been in enough Black Ops zones to know only a handful of insurgent cells had the tech for it. This wasn't random. Someone out there knew exactly who she was and what they were flying. She tried another frequency anyway. Raven 7-1, priority distress, grid 259, under heavy fire. Multiple hostiles. Static swallowed her words, loud and merciless. She exhaled through her nose, slow, controlled. Fear never helped anyone fly a damaged bird. "Reed, I want a system scan. See if anything's transmitting inside the hull bugs, trackers, anything." He gave a short nod and started working. The cockpit lights flickered as more warning indicators came alive: fuel leak, wing stress, hydraulic imbalance. Each red light was another whisper telling them they shouldn't still be in the air. Below, a shadow streaked across the valley floor. Alyssa's head snapped toward it. A drone sleek, black, circling. Not one of theirs. She grabbed the binoculars from the side rack and focused. The drone's undercarriage had been modified, its silhouette heavier than normal. "That's no recon unit," she muttered. "They've got a payload." Reed looked up. "You think?" "Yeah, it's painting us for something bigger." Before she could finish, the drone tilted sharply and shot upward, disappearing into the clouds. Seconds later, the radar pinged again, 2 fast-moving contacts approaching from the west. "Missiles?" Reed's voice cracked. "Probably guided," Alyssa said. "They've got us marked." She pushed the throttle forward, forcing the remaining engine to scream. The Spartan lurched, shaking violently, but responded. She banked left, using the canyon as a shield, hugging the terrain so close the wings nearly clipped rock. Behind them, 2 white trails streaked through the sky and vanished into the ridges, detonating in twin bursts that sent stones tumbling down. The concussion hit seconds later, rattling bolts loose in the cockpit ceiling. A panel dropped, swinging on one hinge. Reed caught it before it struck her. Alyssa gritted her teeth. "They're learning our evasion curve. Smart bastards." Reed glanced at her. "How do you stay so calm?" "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm busy." Another alarm screamed, fuel pressure dropping faster than before. A line must have ruptured. They had maybe 40 minutes of flight time left, less if they kept pushing full throttle. She needed a plan. "Map," she said. "Bring up terrain overlay." The digital display glowed dimly. Part of it was fried, but Reed managed to get enough resolution to show nearby valleys and mountain routes. She scanned quickly. If they could make it 50 miles east, they'd reach the Coincidental corridor, a natural labyrinth where radar interference was high. It wasn't friendly territory, but it was cover. Set a course east, she ordered. Reed looked doubtful. That's going to bring us closer to enemy lines. Exactly, she said. They'll never expect we'd go toward them. He blinked, then gave a shaky laugh. You SEALs really do think backward. Backward works, she replied. The Spartan turned, its wings groaning. Alyssa felt every vibration through the seat her body, already memorizing the rhythm of the wounded engine. Every pilot learned that rhythm. It told you how long your plane would stay alive. Minutes passed like hours. The radio hissed continuously, a dull reminder that no one could hear them. The sun had climbed higher, glaring off the cracked windshield. Sweat rolled down her neck under the heavy flight suit. Reed leaned back, wiping his face. Why do you think they're after us? It's just surveillance gear. Because it's not, Alyssa said quietly. Those crates in the cargo bay classified black boxes from a downed recon jet last week. Intel thinks they contain encrypted sensor data. If enemy tech teams get it, they can spoof our drone feeds. Reed stared. You knew? I didn't need to. The escort order told me enough. They only assign SEAL pilots for missions that go sideways. He swallowed hard. So we're bait? Pretty much. They both went silent for a moment. Then the radar flashed again, multiple heat signatures, closing fast. Not missiles this time. Helicopters. At least 3, maybe 4. The ambush was scaling up. Whoever was running this wanted them down alive. Contact's closing at 200 knots, Reed said. They'll have us visual in 3 minutes. Alyssa didn't hesitate. Armed countermeasures can prep smoke deploy. We're not armed, Commander. Cargo plane, remember? She smirked. That's what they think. Reaching beneath her seat, she pulled out a compact switch box connected to a hidden circuit, a SEAL retrofit designed for emergencies. She flipped 2 toggles. From under the wings, disguised panels slid open, revealing small flare launchers and chaff pods, non-offensive, but enough to create chaos. You modified the Spartan? Reed asked, astonished. I prefer surprises. Moments later, the first helicopter came into view, black silhouette skimming the ridges. Alyssa saw the muzzle flash before she heard the rounds tracers cutting across the sky like burning rain. She rolled right, dropping altitude again. Bullets pinged against the fuselage. The cargo bay rattled. Structural integrity at 60%. Reed shouted. 60's plenty, she said, forcing the yoke forward. She triggered the smoke pods. A dense gray plume erupted behind them, blinding the gunners. Then she fired the flares bright, blinding orbs of light spiraling upward, confusing heat-seeking sensors. The helicopters hesitated. That was all she needed. Alyssa cut power, letting the plane dip suddenly, engines whining. It felt like falling through air itself. Reed's stomach dropped. They disappeared beneath the radar horizon, gliding between canyons where GPS couldn't follow. Silence returned, but it was a different kind, tense, electric. Reed finally spoke, his voice hoarse. We can't keep this up. Fuel's bleeding out. Communications are dead. And if we go any lower, we'll hit rock, she finished. Yeah, I know. He looked at her, searching her face for fear, maybe for reassurance. Instead, he saw the same thing every SEAL had when the fight turned impossible focus. What's next? He asked quietly. Alyssa didn't answer immediately. She scanned the map again, eyes narrowing. There was a narrow gorge 15 miles ahead. Deep, twisting, nearly invisible on radar, nicknamed by ground troops as the Canyon of Fire. If they could make it there, she might lose the helicopters. If not, it would be their grave. We head for the canyon, she said finally. Reed stared. That place eats aircraft alive. Then we'll make it choke, she replied. He gave a disbelieving laugh, part terror, part awe. You really are insane. She just smiled faintly. That's why they call me Hawk. For a moment, neither spoke. The drone of the engine filled the space between them, a mechanical heartbeat refusing to die. Outside, the sun cut through the haze, turning the mountains ahead into burning silhouettes. Reed adjusted the trim again. You think anyone's coming for us? Someone always comes, Alyssa said softly, glancing at the bracelet on her wrist. The question is when. In the distance, the echoes of rotor blades grew faint but steady. The chase wasn't over. She tightened her grip on the controls, eyes fixed on the jagged mouth of the canyon forming ahead, a labyrinth of cliffs where the air itself shimmered with heat. Somewhere inside that maze, she'd find either survival or a crash site that would become legend. Either way, Alyssa Brennan refused to fall quietly. She rolled her shoulders, set her jaw, and whispered to herself, "Time to show them how seals really fly." And with that, she banked toward the rising wall of rock, leading the ambush straight into the jaws of the canyon of fire. The first turn into the canyon nearly tore the wings off. The Spartan's engine screamed under the sudden strain, metal groaning as Alyssa forced the heavy aircraft into a banking descent. Dust and loose stones erupted in a swirling cloud behind them. Reed braced against the cockpit frame, eyes wide, sweat streaking his face. The canyon walls rose on both sides, red rock cliffs towering like jagged spears, their shadows swallowing the daylight. Altitude 200. Reed shouted. Hold it steady, Alyssa replied, eyes never leaving the terrain ahead. If we hit a downdraft, we're done. The plane bucked violently as hot air currents twisted between the cliffs. Sparks burst from the dashboard, one display flickering out, another bleeding static. Alyssa ignored them. She was flying blind, relying on muscle memory, reflexes, and her understanding of how air moved through mountains. She'd flown fighter jets through hurricanes, insertion choppers through sandstorms, but nothing compared to this. Every second, the margin for error shrank. One wrong tilt, one missed gust, and they'd be a fireball tumbling through the gorge. Behind them, faint thuds echoed. The insurgent helicopters had followed. They're coming through the ridge. Reed shouted. 3 of them, maybe 4. Alyssa glanced back. Through the dust, she caught flashes of metal and the glint of sunlight on rotors. She muttered, persistent. Another alarm screamed across the cockpit. Missile lock. Flares ready? She asked. Already deployed, Reed said. They're relocking. The first missile streaked toward them, slicing through the smoke with a shriek. Alyssa jerked the yoke hard right, diving sharply. The Spartan tilted almost 90 degrees, its wingtip, grazing the canyon wall, close enough to shear rock from its face. The missile detonated above them, the explosion deafening. The blast waves slammed into the tail, sending the aircraft spinning. Reed's harness snapped tight, pinning him to the seat. Engine 1 losing pressure, he yelled. Compensate with flaps, she ordered, wrestling the controls. Come on, girl. Don't quit on me now. She coaxed the plane out of the spin, pulling up just before they hit the canyon floor. The altimeter needle hovered near 0. Reed looked at her, half in disbelief. You just pulled a 5-ton aircraft through a fighter roll. Alyssa smirked. SEAL training. We improvise. But her humor vanished as another explosion tore through the air. The second missile. It missed the fuselage, but caught the rear stabilizer. A massive jolt threw the plane upward, then sideways. Warning lights flared red across the board. Tail controls gone, Reed shouted. We can't stabilize pitch. Then we don't, Alyssa said through gritted teeth. We ride it. She pushed the throttle to max on the remaining engine. The Spartan roared back into a shaky climb, bouncing between air pockets like a wounded animal refusing to die. Outside, Shrapnel from the blast rained across the wings. One piece sliced through the window beside her, drawing a thin line of blood across her cheek. She wiped it away without breaking focus. "Radar's fried," Reed said. "We're blind." "Good," she replied. "So are they." For the next minute, all that existed was sound, the tortured groan of the fuselage, the whine of the propeller, the rapid-fire thump of machine gun bursts echoing off canyon walls. The enemy helicopters were closing in again, their tracers cutting streaks through the smoky air. Alyssa weaved the plane through the narrowest section of the gorge, where sunlight barely reached the floor. The aircraft's wings missed the cliffs by meters. Reed's breathing turned shallow. "They're going to box us in," he said. "They'll try," she murmured, "but they don't know this bird." Alyssa reached under her console and flipped open a hidden switch, a last resort emergency system installed by SEAL engineers. It wasn't weaponry, but it could fool radar into seeing 10 versions of the same aircraft. She toggled it, deploying ghost beacons. Tiny pods dropped from the belly of the Spartan, scattering across the canyon. Seconds later, the insurgents. Targeting systems went haywire, multiple signals lighting up their radar. Confusion crackled over their comms. From above, one helicopter opened fire at the wrong target, hitting another in its rotor span. The explosion bloomed like orange lightning, scattering metal across the canyon. The shockwave hit the Spartans seconds later, buffeting them hard. Reed stared in disbelief. Did they just shoot each other? "Works for me," Alyssa said. The remaining helicopters adjusted, firing wild. Rounds stitched the side of the aircraft, ripping holes through the fuselage. One bullet shattered the instrument glass, slicing across Reed's sleeve. He cursed, but kept working the throttle. "We're bleeding air pressure. We're not going to make it out of here." Alyssa didn't answer. She scanned ahead, a narrow passage opening at the far end of the canyon. Beyond it, the landscape dropped into an open basin, offering a shot at escape altitude. But there was one last stretch, the tightest part of the gorge, where even drones avoided flying. Reed saw where she was looking. "You can't fit through there." "We'll fit," she said. "If not, we'll make it fit." The helicopter guns started again, bullets peppering the tail. The Spartan lurched and shook. Alyssa felt control slipping. She took a breath, slow, steady, focused. This was the moment that separated pilots from survivors. "Brace," she shouted. She pulled the yoke hard, banking left, then rolled right, a maneuver no cargo pilot would ever attempt. The plane flipped onto its side, sliding through the crevice almost vertically, one wing grazing stone, sparks flying. The metal screamed, but held. They burst out the other side, sunlight flooding the cockpit again. Reed gasped for air like he'd surfaced from drowning. "Holy, don't say it," Alyssa cut in, smirking faintly. Then the smirk vanished. A new threat loomed ahead, a cluster of insurgent trucks parked atop the canyon rim, armed with anti-air guns. They'd been waiting. Alyssa's mind raced. No altitude, no weapons, barely one engine left. But she still had one move. "Hold on," she said. "We're doing a drop turn." Reed blinked. "A what?" "Watch and pray." She cut throttle completely, letting the plane dive nose first, building speed. The anti-air gunners fired too high, expecting her to climb. Instead, she fell straight down into the canyon, pulling level at the last possible second. As the ground leveled beneath them, she gunned the remaining engine. The plane surged upward, skimming past the ridge, so close that the exhaust heat ignited the insurgents' ammo crates. The ridge exploded behind them in a chain of fire. Reed stared back, eyes wide. "You're insane." Alyssa's hands trembled slightly now, the adrenaline hitting. "SEALs don't die sane," she muttered. For a brief, impossible moment, they had open sky again. The helicopters were gone, lost in the chaos of collapsing cliffs and smoke. But the victory was short-lived. A new alarm blared. Fuel 3%. The right engine sputtered. They were running on fumes. Reed's voice broke. "We can't climb. We're out of lift." "I know," Alyssa said. "We're going to glide." "Glide where?" "We're over enemy land." "Exactly," she replied, eyes narrowing, "which means rescue will be quick." She flipped a concealed switch above her head, the emergency seal beacon. It transmitted a single encrypted signal to one location, a classified operations hub known only as Eagle Station. The message was simple. "Pilot down. Code Hawk for a moment." Silence returned. The plane floated more than it flew, wounded but still alive. Smoke trailed from its tail like a tattered flag. Elisa looked out over the horizon, the line where desert met sky. She could feel the aircraft dying beneath her, every vibration like a heartbeat slowing down. "Reed," she said quietly. "You did good." He turned to her. "We're not done." She smiled faintly. "No, we're not. But we're not going down easy either." He looked at her, and for the first time, saw what every SEAL saw in combat. Calm defiance in the face of impossible odds. The radio crackled faintly, then a voice, distorted but clear enough. "Raven 7-1, this is Eagle Command. Signal received. Hold position." Elisa's eyes widened slightly. Reinforcements were coming. But above them, the clouds parted again, and through the haze, new shadows appeared. 3 fast-moving aircraft, not American, not friendly. Reed's voice dropped. "You've got to be kidding me." Elisa's hands tightened on the controls. Round 2, then. The sky above them darkened with approaching fire. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. Smoke filled the cockpit, curling through the cracks in the shattered console. Warning lights pulsed red, casting a hellish glow over Alyssa's determined face. The Spartan's right engine coughed its last breath, a metallic shriek fading into silence. Only one engine remained. Below them stretched a wasteland of dunes and broken rock, enemy territory. Above them, 3 enemy jets sliced through the haze, closing fast. Reed's hands trembled as he scanned the fading displays. "We're out of fuel, out of altitude, and they're coming in hot." "What now, Hawk?" Elisa's jaw tightened. "We make them work for every inch." She tilted the remaining engine throttle, coaxing every last drop of thrust. The aircraft shuddered, struggling to respond, its movements sluggish but alive. Through the static, the comms crackled again. "Raven 7-1, this is Eagle Command. Reinforcements inbound. Hold your vector, copy?" Alyssa pressed the mic. "Copy, Eagle. Be advised, we're outnumbered and low. Estimated time to blackout, 3 minutes. Negative on that. Raven 7-1, hold altitude. We're bringing you home." The transmission faded. Elisa exhaled slowly. 3 minutes, she murmured. "We can give them that." Reed's eyes darted to the radar, 3 blips closing in fast. "They're locking again." "Good," she said coldly. "Let them." The jets swooped down, engines screaming. The first missile streaked toward them. Fast, silver, precise. Elisa yanked the yoke hard left, diving into a spiral. The missile missed by inches, detonating behind them. The shockwave rocked the Spartan violently, shaking loose panels and scattering debris across the cockpit. The second jet dove in from above, guns blazing. Tracer rounds cut through the air like flaming arrows. One ripped through the fuselage, striking Reed's console. Sparks burst in his face. He shielded himself with one arm, coughing through the smoke. "Systems dead. We've lost nav." "Doesn't matter," Alyssa growled. "I've got eyes." She rolled the plane beneath the enemy formation, forcing them to overshoot. The Spartan dropped lower, barely 200 feet above the desert floor. The landscape whipped past in a blur. Dunes, ruins, bones of long-forgotten machinery. Reed struggled to keep his composure. "You're flying a cargo bird like it's a jet." Elisa's tone was flat. "It's not the plane that matters. It's the pilot." The enemy regrouped, coming around again. The first jet unleashed another missile. Elisa watched its smoke trail in the mirror. "Brace." She cut throttle completely. The missile screamed past them, overshooting and slamming into the sand ahead. The explosion sent a shockwave through the ground, lifting the Spartan into the air like a toy. The wings wobbled, metal bending under the strain. "Reed," she yelled. "Vent the remaining fuel, now." He hesitated. "That'll kill the engine." "It'll also kill the fire risk. Do it." Reed flipped the emergency valve. The last of their fuel hissed out, a shimmering mist trailing behind them. The remaining engine sputtered twice, then died. Silence engulfed the cockpit. The plane became a glider. For a moment, all sound vanished except the eerie whisper of wind through shattered panels. Reed swallowed hard. "We're dead in the air." "Not yet," Elisa said quietly. "We're ghosts now. Let's act like it." She adjusted the flaps, easing the aircraft into a shallow glide path. The enemy jets circled above, scanning for heat signatures. But with no fuel, the Spartan was invisible to their sensors. Reed stared in disbelief. "You're hiding from them." "By dying?" "Temporary death," she corrected. "It's a SEAL specialty." The jets flew overhead, uncertain, looping in wide circles. One broke formation, diving low for visual confirmation. Elisa's mind raced too soon. She glanced down, a stretch of cracked desert, riddled with dry riverbeds and jagged rock. "Hold tight," she muttered. As the jet closed in, she angled the Spartan toward the riverbed. The massive aircraft skimmed the surface, stirring clouds of dust. The pursuing pilot hesitated, unsure if it was wreckage or a trick. That hesitation saved them. Elisa pulled up sharply, using the thermal lift from the desert floor to gain precious altitude. The Spartan rose, ghost-like, out of the dust storm, just enough to spot something glinting on the horizon. Reed leaned forward. "What is that?" She squinted. "Metal. Movement. Multiple signatures." Then the radio crackled again, clearer this time. "Raven 7-1, this is Falcon Team. We have visual. Smoke markers inbound. Hold your vector." Reed's relief was audible. "That's them." "Not yet," Elisa warned. "They still have to get through that." The enemy jets noticed the approaching reinforcements. They broke formation, splitting wide, ready for a final assault. Elisa knew she couldn't fight, not without weapons, not without power. But she could draw attention. She banked hard toward the nearest jet. Reed shouted, "What are you doing?" "Buying them time," she said. The Spartan dove straight toward the incoming aircraft, a suicide angle. The enemy pilot, startled by the insane maneuver, pulled up too late. Elisa leveled out just below him, her massive plane's turbulence slamming into his underside. His jet lost stability, spinning out of control and slamming into the canyon wall below. Reed blinked in shock. "You rammed a fighter with a transport plane." Elisa smirked. "And we're still flying." The second enemy jet closed in from behind, cannons firing. Bullets tore through the tail, severing cables. The plane jolted, pitching sideways. Elisa fought the controls with every ounce of strength. "We're losing hydraulics." Reed shouted. "Then help me keep her level." She barked. Together they pulled on the manual backup handles, forcing the plane's wings to steady. Sweat poured down their faces. The third enemy jet locked missiles again, 2 this time. Reed's voice broke. We can't dodge those. Elisa's eyes flashed. We don't have to. Above them, the sky suddenly filled with thunder. A roar split the heavens. 2 USF-22 Raptors, streaking in from the east. Their contrails cut through the smoke like white blades. The radio blared again. Raven 7-1, this is Falcon Lead. We've got your 6. Hang tight. The F-22s fired almost simultaneously. Twin missiles streaked forward, striking both enemy jets before they could react. The explosions painted the sky orange and red, fragments raining down like burning hail. Reed let out a shaky laugh. They made it. Elisa allowed herself a small smile. Told you we weren't done. But celebration was brief. The Spartan was falling fast now. They had no power, no lift, and the ground was rushing up to meet them. Brace for impact. Elisa shouted. The aircraft hit the desert hard. The impact threw them both against their harnesses, metal screaming as the landing gear tore free. The Spartan skidded across the sand, nose tipping, dirt exploding through the cockpit. When it finally stopped, the silence was deafening. Reed coughed, unbuckling his harness. We're alive? Elisa groaned, feeling the sting of glass cuts on her arms. Define alive. Smoke rose from the wreckage. One wing had snapped off entirely. The cockpit was a mangled mess. But the fuselage was intact, barely. The radio buzzed. Raven 7-1, this is Falcon Lead. We have eyes on your crash site. Rescue team en route. Elisa leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Then, through the broken window, she saw it, movement in the distance. Not rescue. Figures in desert camouflage, moving fast. Reed followed her gaze. Oh no. They're already here. Elisa's eyes snapped open, steel returning to her voice. Then we fight. She reached beneath her seat, pulling free a sealed case marked with the SEAL insignia. Inside, 2 compact rifles, emergency beacons, and a flare kit. She handed one weapon to Reed. Welcome to the ground war, she said. The sun dipped behind the canyon rim, bathing the wreck in blood-red light. Shadows moved closer through the dust. Elisa crouched by the torn-open doorway, weapon ready. They thought the fight was over. Reed checked his ammo. They were wrong. From above, the faint hum of Falcon Team's engines grew louder, reinforcements closing fast. But on the ground, the first enemy reached the crash site, rifles raised. Elisa's finger tightened on the trigger. We're not going down easy, she whispered. Then the first shot rang out. The wind howled across the wreckage, carrying dust and smoke into the twilight. The Spartan's massive frame lay half buried in sand, flames licking from the shattered engine. The smell of burnt fuel hung heavy in the air. Elisa crouched beside the torn fuselage, rifle ready. Her breathing was steady, measured, like a hunter waiting in silence. Reed knelt beside her, pale and wide-eyed, gripping his weapon too tightly. From beyond the dunes, shadows moved. 5, maybe 6 figures, approaching low and fast. Their movements were precise, military. Reed whispered, "They're organized. These aren't scavengers. They're soldiers," Elisa said quietly. "Same ones who ambushed us." The enemy circled the wreck like predators. One raised a flare. It hissed through the air and burst overhead, painting the desert in harsh white light. The Spartan became a beacon, exposed, bleeding, broken. Elisa's finger tightened on the trigger. Now they know exactly where we are. The first bullet struck the hull, a metallic clang that echoed through the night. Then another. Then 10 more. Down. Elisa shouted, shoving Reed behind the wreckage. Bullets ripped through metal inches above their heads. Sparks flew. Reed's heart pounded in his throat. They'll overrun us. Not if we hit first. She slid to the edge of the fuselage, sighted through her scope, and fired 3 clean shots. Each one found a target. 2 men dropped instantly. The third stumbled back into the sand. 3 down, she muttered. Reed blinked. How did you? SEAL qualification requires 500-yard precision shooting, she said coldly. Now cover the right flank. Reed nodded, snapping into focus. He leaned out, firing short bursts toward the dune ridge. 2 enemies ducked, returning fire. Sand exploded inches from his face. Elisa crawled to a new position, keeping low. Every move was tactical, precise. Her mind wasn't just surviving. It was calculating. Distance, angles, ammunition, escape routes. The radio crackled suddenly, faint, filled with static. Raven 7-1, this is Falcon Team. ETA, 5 minutes. Hold your position. Reed exhaled. They're close. 5 minutes is a lifetime out here, Elisa replied. Another burst of fire cut across the wreck. 1 bullet tore through her sleeve, grazing her arm. She gritted her teeth, but didn't flinch. Reed looked at the blood. You're hit. She glanced down, then shrugged. Not enough to stop me. A flash of light caught her eye. An enemy setting up a rocket launcher behind the dunes. Her voice hardened. They're bringing out heavy ordnance. Can this wreck take another hit? No, she said simply. She yanked open a side panel of the Spartan and pulled out a small metal case, emergency flares, and demolition charges. What are you doing? Reed asked. Buying time. She loaded a flare into the launcher, adjusted her aim toward the distant ridge, and fired. The flare arced high into the air, a glowing streak that exploded behind the enemy's position. The sudden light blinded them for a split second, just enough. Elisa dashed out from cover, sprinting across open sand with the demolition pack in hand. Bullets followed her like wasps, kicking up dust at her feet. She didn't slow. Reed's voice cracked through the comms. Hawk, get back. Cover fire. She shouted. Reed rose halfway from cover, firing wildly to suppress the enemy. Elisa reached the ridge, dove behind a boulder, and armed the charge. 30 seconds, she whispered, pressing the detonator. Then she ran. She barely made it halfway back before the explosion ripped through the night. A blinding flash, followed by a thunderous roar. The ridge collapsed inward, engulfing the attackers in a wave of sand and fire. Reed shielded his face as debris rained down. When the dust cleared, the battlefield had gone silent. Elisa staggered back to cover, coughing, her uniform torn and blackened. Reed grabbed her arm. You're insane. She gave a faint smirk. You're welcome. For a moment, it seemed over. But then came a new sound, the distant rumble of engines. Reed's eyes widened. More vehicles? Elisa listened. Trucks. Maybe 6 or 7. Reinforcements. She cursed under her breath. They're not giving up. She checked her rifle. Only 5 rounds left. Reed had maybe half a magazine. The headlights appeared first, bouncing across the dunes like angry stars. The convoy was closing in fast. Elisa scanned the terrain. Open sand, no high ground, no escape. We can't outrun them. Reed swallowed hard. So what do? We stand. She crouched beside him, eyes locked on the horizon. You see those cliffs? She said, pointing north. That's our extraction point. If Falcon Team gets here in time, that's where they'll land. And if they don't? She looked at him, calm, almost serene. Then we make sure they remember who they're chasing. The truck stopped about 100 yards out. Dozens of soldiers poured out, spreading information. Reed muttered, "We're surrounded." "Good," Alyssa said, loading her last magazine. "That makes it easy to aim." The first wave came fast, shouting, firing. The air filled with the crack of rifles and the hiss of bullets slicing through dust. Alyssa and Reed returned fire, methodical and relentless. Every shot counted. One fell. Another. But for every enemy down, two more advanced. Reed's rifle clicked empty. "I'm dry. Use the sidearm," she ordered, tossing him her pistol. She switched to burst fire, taking out 3 soldiers trying to flank their left. A round grazed her shoulder. She barely reacted. The ground shook again, this time from above. Alyssa looked up and saw 2 dark shapes descending through the smoke. Falcon extraction helicopters. Reed shouted, "They're here." Alyssa's relief was brief. "Not yet. We still have to reach them." The helicopters opened fire, miniguns ripping through enemy lines. Sand erupted in clouds. Trucks exploded in chain reactions. "Go!" Alyssa yelled, grabbing Reed's arm. Together they ran, sprinting across open desert toward the descending birds. Bullets whizzed past, explosions lighting their path. Behind them, the Spartan burned, a monument to survival and sacrifice. Reed stumbled, his leg catching on debris. Alyssa yanked him up, dragging him forward. "Move!" The first chopper touched down 50 yards away. A crewman leaned out, waving them in. "Go, go, go." They were almost there when another explosion went off, a rocket striking the sand beside them. The blast threw them both to the ground. Alyssa's ears rang, vision spinning. She looked up through the haze, more enemies pouring over the ridge, one raising another launcher. Reed crawled beside her. "We're not gonna make it." "Yes, we are," she rasped. She grabbed the last flare from her vest, fired it straight into the air. The bright red signal screamed upward, a desperate beacon. Above, the helicopter gunners locked onto the signal and unleashed a storm of fire. Bullets shredded the enemy line, cutting down every last attacker in seconds. Silence fell, broken only by the beating rotors. Alyssa pulled Reed to his feet. They stumbled toward the helicopter, collapsing inside as the door gunner pulled them in. "Pilot secure." The gunner yelled. "Let's get out of here." The chopper lifted off, the desert shrinking below them, a field of fire and ruin. Reed leaned back, shaking, covered in dust and blood. We made it." Alyssa stared out the open door at the burning Spartan. "No," she said softly. "She made it. We just followed her lead." As the helicopter climbed into the fading light, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in crimson. The desert turned red, not just from blood or fire, but from the memory of a battle that would never be forgotten. Alyssa closed her eyes, exhaustion finally winning over adrenaline. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. But even in that moment of calm, she knew the fight wasn't truly over. Somewhere out there, someone had planned this ambush, someone who wanted her dead. And she intended to find out who. The sky burned with fire, tracer rounds slicing through the air like streaks of lightning. Alyssa Brennan's plane groaned under the strain. Every turn, every jolt felt like a struggle between life and gravity. Her wounded shoulder throbbed with each vibration, but she kept her grip steady on the controls. The horizon spun in wild arcs through her cracked windshield. Alarms screamed. Oxygen masks dangled uselessly. Yet through the chaos, her focus was sharp as a blade. She wasn't thinking about dying. She was thinking about flying. "Reed, stay with me," she shouted over the roar. Her co-pilot, face smeared with soot, nodded weakly. The fuel gauge had dropped below red. Hydraulic pressure was gone. Half the instruments were dead. They were limping on instinct. Alyssa knew they had maybe 5 minutes of flight time left, if luck decided to show mercy. Then, cutting through the static, came the faint pulse of the distress beacon she had triggered minutes ago. It was a silent signal one reserved only for Black Ops SEAL air divisions. It didn't broadcast coordinates through regular military channels. It whispered them through an encrypted pulse, bouncing off satellites only a handful of people on Earth could detect. She prayed someone had heard it. Outside, the canyon narrowed into a maze of cliffs that looked painted in smoke and fire. Bullets pinged against the fuselage. Ground teams had set up anti-air batteries at every ridge. Alyssa jerked the yoke left, skimming dangerously close to the canyon wall. Sparks flew as the wingtip scraped rock. Metal screamed. Reed's voice cracked. "You're gonna clip us." "Not today," she muttered through clenched teeth. A new sound pierced the chaos one she hadn't heard in hours. A distant rumble, deep and thunderous. Reed froze. "What is that?" Alyssa tilted her head toward the rear window. 2 dark silhouettes cut through the clouds above, moving fast. Then she saw them clearly, the unmistakable profiles of FA-18 Super Hornets. Their wings glistened under the sunlight like twin blades. Her radio flickered to life for the first time in half an hour. A voice came through, cool and calm. "Hawk, this is Talon Lead. We have your signal. You just stay airborne. We'll take it from here." Alyssa's chest filled with relief. "Talon, you magnificent bastards," she breathed. The Hornets dove in formation, engines roaring. Missiles streaked from their wings, cutting into the ridges where insurgents were firing from. Explosions bloomed in perfect sync, sending dust and debris raining down. It wasn't just an airstrike. It was a rescue ballet choreographed in chaos. The canyon lit up with destruction. Reed leaned forward, staring in awe. SEAL Air Command actually came. "They always come," Alyssa said softly. Below, the insurgents tried to adapt, but the SEAL pilots were relentless. Their jet-mounted cameras streamed live combat visuals to Alyssa's flickering console. She watched them swoop, roll, and dive, each maneuver done with surgical precision. Every round they fired seemed to be guided by vengeance and discipline. "Talon Lead to Hawk," the voice came again. "You're losing altitude. You've got 20 miles before your window to land disappears. Recommend course correction 245 south." Alyssa adjusted the controls. "Copy that, Talon, but I've got no thrust on my left engine and partial failure on hydraulics." "Understood. We'll escort you in. Keep that bird in the air." She smiled grimly. "I was planning to." Then came a tremor from beneath her seat. The left engine coughed violently, flames erupting along the casing. Reed tried dousing it with the onboard extinguisher, but the damage was too deep. The entire wing began vibrating. "Hawk, you're losing structural integrity," Talon warned. "You need to eject." "Negative." Alyssa barked. "I'm not leaving this plane in enemy territory." There was silence for a beat, then Talon replied, admiration in his tone. "Copy that. We'll hold your sky." With that, the Hornets broke formation and flew low, strafing enemy positions relentlessly. Alyssa steered the crippled aircraft toward an opening at the canyon's end. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a safe exit, but it was the only chance they had. The aircraft jolted again. A blast rocked the right side, sending the plane into a spin. The world turned upside down, sky, earth, fire, sky again. Reed screamed as loose debris smashed through the cockpit. Alyssa fought the controls, muscles straining, every nerve in her body screaming in protest. The plane leveled out just before impact with the canyon wall. Adrenaline burned through her veins. "Come on, baby," she muttered to the aircraft, patting the console like it was alive. "Hold together a little longer." As they emerged from the canyon, The full damage was visible black smoke trailing behind. One wing half shredded, the tail flickering with fire. The Hornets flanked them, protecting her like guardians. Through the cockpit glass, Alyssa could see one of the pilots turn his head, giving a thumbs up. That small gesture lit something inside her. She wasn't alone anymore. "Reed, prepare for emergency descent," she commanded. "We're heading for the dry riverbed up ahead." Reed swallowed hard. "You think we can land it?" "We'll find out soon." Alyssa switched the landing gear to manual. 2 of the wheels deployed, 1 stuck. It didn't matter. She'd landed worse before. She could do it again. Talon Lead's voice came once more. "Hawk, once you touch down, SEAL Ground Team Bravo 6 will extract. You've got about 7 minutes before hostiles regroup." "Understood. Tell them to bring coffee." The radio crackled with a small laugh. Even in near death, she still had humor. That was the SEAL way: fight hard, laugh harder, never die easy. The Hornets surged ahead, strafing the landing zone, clearing a path. Alyssa adjusted flaps manually, slowing descent. Every inch felt like a battle against gravity. The nose dipped dangerously low. Reed braced. The altimeter spun wildly. 500 feet. Reed yelled. Alyssa squinted, aligning the nose with the riverbed. Her breathing slowed. Time itself seemed to stretch. The roar faded into silence in her mind. All she could hear was her heartbeat and the whisper of the controls under her palms. 200 feet. She pulled back gently. The smoke outside turned gold as sunlight pierced through. 50 feet. Hold on. The wheels hit. First one exploded instantly, sending sparks flying. The fuselage slammed down, skidding across the sand in a storm of dust and debris. Metal tore, glass shattered, and the tail section sheared off completely. The cockpit shook violently, but Alyssa kept her hands locked on the controls until the aircraft groaned to a halt. Then silence. For a moment, neither of them moved. Smoke filled the air. The only sound was the faint hiss of cooling metal. Alyssa exhaled shakily. She was still alive. Reed groaned beside her, clutching his ribs. Outside, the Hornets circled once, then climbed skyward. Over the radio came one final message. "Beautiful landing, Hawk. SEALs are inbound. Welcome back." Alyssa looked through the cracked windshield at the scorched horizon. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, but her spirit didn't waver. They had survived an ambush, an engine failure, and a canyon of fire, and she had done it all on instinct and training. As she unbuckled her harness, she thought about the insurgents who had planned her death with such precision. They had studied her flight path, tracked her signal, and waited in the shadows. But they had underestimated one thing: a Navy SEAL never flies alone. In the distance, she saw dust clouds rising, the SEAL extraction Osprey coming in fast. Alyssa smiled faintly, pressing her forehead to the cool glass. The mission wasn't over yet, but she'd already won the sky. The ambushers had learned a brutal truth that day. When you go after a SEAL pilot, you're not just facing a plane. You're facing the entire brotherhood of warriors who never surrender. And in that moment, surrounded by smoke and ruin, Alyssa Brennan had become more than a survivor. She had become a legend written in the sky. The desert stretched before her, endless, blistering, and hostile. The dry riverbed ahead looked like salvation from the sky, but Alyssa Brennan knew it was a death trap in disguise. The wind currents were unpredictable, the sand soft enough to swallow landing gear whole. Yet, with one engine gone and the other coughing out smoke, she had no other choice. The cockpit was half-lit in warning lights, red and orange flashing in chaotic rhythm. The oxygen system had failed, and the smell of burnt wiring filled the air. Reed Tully, her co-pilot, wiped blood from his forehead and checked the fuel gauge. Empty. He met her eyes, voice trembling. "Commander, we're gliding." Elisa nodded, face set in quiet determination. "Then let's make it count." The hornets that had shielded them were gone, ascending to higher altitude to avoid enemy retaliation. Now it was just her, Reed, and a half-dead aircraft falling through the sky. The altitude meter ticked down fast. 3,000 feet? 2,500. 2,000. Alyssa's mind went silent, focusing entirely on the flight path. Her left hand steadied the throttle, while her right manipulated what was left of the hydraulic controls. The yoke shuddered with every touch, the aircraft screaming against the strain. Each movement felt like balancing a dying animal that refused to quit. "Landing gears still jammed," Reed reported. "We're going belly first." "Good," Alyssa said calmly. "Less to break." Her tone carried the weight of someone who had long accepted that fear was useless. She had been through war zones, survived crashes, seen friends fall beside her. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about proving that no ambush, no enemy, no force could take her out of the sky. Below, the canyon opened into a wide expanse of golden dust. The sun hung low, bleeding orange light across the landscape. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. Elisa didn't trust peace. "Brace for impact in 30 seconds," she shouted. Reed tightened his harness. His hand trembled slightly, but there was no panic in his eyes now. Elisa had that effect. She made chaos feel controllable. The altimeter hit 1,000 feet. Elisa gently pulled back the yoke, angling the nose upward, just enough to slow descent. The aircraft groaned, metal popping like distant gunfire. The remaining engine sputtered once, then died completely. Silence. For the first time since the ambush began, the sky was quiet. "Power's gone," Reed said softly. Elisa nodded. "We don't need power. We have gravity." At 400 feet, the sand swirled below like waves. Her instinct screamed she was coming in too fast, but there was no more drag to deploy, no flaps to control. This was it, the final test of everything she'd learned as a SEAL pilot. 200 feet. Reed shouted. Elisa clenched her teeth. "Hold tight." The world exploded. The aircraft slammed into the riverbed with a sound like thunder. The first impact tore the landing gear off instantly, sending shards of metal flying in every direction. The fuselage hit next, bouncing once, impossibly, before sliding across the sand in a storm of dust. Sparks showered from the wings, flames streaking along the hull. The cockpit window shattered, pelting Alyssa's face with glass. Reed screamed as the seatbelt dug into his chest. Elisa's vision blurred. She felt her shoulder wrench violently, but she didn't let go of the controls. She fought to keep the plane straight, preventing it from rolling. The sound was deafening. Metal grinding, fire roaring, the echo of destruction stretching for miles. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the aircraft shuddered to a stop. The air filled with smoke and the bitter stench of burning fuel. Elisa's hands fell from the yoke, trembling uncontrollably. Her helmet visor was cracked. Blood trickled from her temple. Silence followed, a silence so complete it was almost unreal. "Reed?" she rasped. He coughed weakly. Still here, Commander." She exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her throat. "Good, that's two of us." They were alive, battered, bleeding, but alive. The front half of the plane was mostly intact, though fire licked at the rear. Elisa tore off her harness and stumbled to her feet. Her boots hit the sand, sinking slightly as she climbed out through the shattered windshield. The desert wind hit her face, hot and dry, carrying the scent of burning jet fuel. The world outside was silent, except for the distant rumble of approaching engines. She squinted toward the horizon, and there it was, a black dot moving fast, growing larger every second. The seal extraction osprey. Relief surged through her veins. They had made it. But her moment of calm was short-lived. In the distance, through the haze of heat, movement flickered, dark figures emerging from the cliffs. Insurgents. They were coming fast, armed and desperate. The ambush wasn't over. Alyssa cursed under her breath and reached for her sidearm, pulling the Sig Sauer M17 from her holster. Reed climbed out beside her, limping, but armed as well. The two stood shoulder to shoulder in the shadow of their smoking aircraft, facing the advancing enemy. "Think the cavalry's close enough?" Reed asked, voice shaking between pain and defiance. "They'll get here," Alyssa replied. "But if they don't, we make our last stand right here." Her eyes were sharp, scanning the distance. She'd fought in the air, and now she was ready to fight on the ground. Gunfire cracked through the air. The first bullets hit the sand near her boots, spraying dust. Alyssa dropped to one knee, returning fire with precision. Every shot she fired hit its mark, calm, controlled, unflinching. Reed covered the right flank, firing short bursts. The insurgents spread out, trying to encircle them, but they were too far, too exposed. Then came the familiar roar, deep, mechanical, and powerful. The Osprey thundered into view overhead, kicking up a sandstorm with its twin rotors. Ropes dropped from the hatch, and SEAL Team Bravo 6 descended like shadows falling from the sky. Gunfire intensified, but the SEALs moved with deadly efficiency. One team securing the perimeter, while another sprinted toward Alyssa and Reed. Within seconds, they were surrounded by their brothers in arms. A burly SEAL with a helmet visor shouted over the wind, "Commander Brennan?" Alyssa lowered her weapon and nodded. "Right here." He extended his gloved hand. "We've got you, ma'am. Let's get you home." Alyssa hesitated only long enough to look back at her aircraft, the one that had carried her through hell. The flames danced along its wrecked frame like a funeral pyre. She gave it one last nod, whispering, "Good job, girl." Then she grabbed the SEAL's hand and let him pull her up toward the Osprey. The world below blowed into chaos. Gunfire, smoke, shouting. But from above, it all looked distant, small, powerless. The Osprey climbed higher, leaving behind the wreckage, the ambush, and the men who thought they could break a Navy SEAL in the sky. Inside, medics worked quickly, wrapping Alyssa's arm, checking Reed's ribs. She barely noticed. Her gaze was fixed on the window, watching the desert fade beneath her. Talon Lead's voice came through the comms again. "Glad to see you still breathing, Hawk." Alyssa smiled faintly, leaning back against the bulkhead. "Told you I wasn't going down easy." The pilot chuckled. "Copy that, Commander. SEAL Air Command's proud of you. You just made history up there." Her eyes drifted shut, exhaustion washing over her. The last thing she heard before slipping into unconsciousness was the sound of the engines humming, steady, strong, unbroken. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about the crash, the pain, or the blood. She was thinking about the sky, how it had tried to take her, and how she had refused to let it. Alyssa Brennan had faced death at 30,000 feet and walked away. She had fought physics, fire, and fate, and won. And somewhere deep inside her heart, a quiet voice whispered the truth that would become legend among her brothers and sisters in uniform. They thought they could ambush her plane. They never realized Navy SEALs don't fall. They fly through hell and make the sky theirs. The sun rose slowly over the desert, burning away the last of the smoke that had shrouded the Spartan wreckage. The air smelled of scorched metal, dust, and adrenaline. In the relative calm of the Osprey's cabin, Alyssa Brennan sat strapped in, a blanket over her shoulders, medics checking her injuries. Every muscle ached. Her body was a map of battle scars, cuts, bruises, burns. Yet she sat upright, her gaze fixed on the horizon, unbroken. Reed Tully, his ribs bandaged and shoulder wrapped, leaned against the cabin wall. "I don't even know how we're alive," he said, voice low, still in shock. Elisa's lips curved into a faint smile. "You don't fly like a seal and not get a little lucky. That's part of the job." She closed her eyes, remembering every moment of the ambush, the sudden missile strikes, the spiraling enemy jets, the firestorm on the canyon walls, and the relentless precision of Falcon Team. Her mind replayed the Spartan struggle, the groan of the fuselage, the sparks, the roaring engines, every second a heartbeat that had counted toward survival. The Osprey dipped, bringing them closer to the extraction point. A small base of SEAL personnel waited below, medics ready, helicopters standing by for transport to a larger forward operating base. Elisa could see them moving efficiently, almost like shadows on the sand. Every step calculated, every action synchronized. It was the calm after the storm, the order after chaos, a world she had fought to reach. Her phone of thought, silent and precise, replayed the lessons learned in the last 30 minutes of the flight. Anticipation, patience, precision. She hadn't just survived on skill. She had survived on instincts honed for years, sharpened in the fires of training and prior missions. The ambush had been meticulously planned, yet it had failed because it had underestimated her, the pilot, the SEAL, the instinctual warrior who refused to yield. As the Osprey touched down, she unbuckled herself, standing on legs that still shook with fatigue. The heat of the desert hit her, and for a brief moment, she felt every wound, every strain, every ache. But the fire in her eyes remained. She stepped forward, helped onto solid ground by a fellow SEAL, and looked back at the Spartan one final time. The aircraft was a charred monument to endurance, its wings twisted, its fuselage scarred, but still upright, still defiant. Elisa's commanding officer, Captain Morales, approached briskly, eyes sharp but tinged with admiration. "Commander Brennan," he said, voice strong, "you and your co-pilot made it through hell. That was exemplary." Elisa nodded, acknowledging his praise but refusing to indulge in it. "We made it because of teamwork. Falcon Team, ground extraction, Reed's composure, every element mattered." Reed shifted, giving a wry smile. "Teamwork, huh? And here I thought it was just sheer luck." Elisa smirked, shaking her head. "Luck doesn't fly a dying plane through a canyon and land it in one piece." Captain Morale's gaze followed hers, lingering on the Spartan wreck. "And yet, you did it. The ambushers will be dissecting this for weeks, trying to understand how a Navy SEAL survived when everything was stacked against her. You've set a new standard." Elisa's jaw tightened. "They'll learn fast. Never underestimate a SEAL. Not in the air. Not on the ground. Not anywhere." The medics guided her toward the field hospital. But Elisa paused, looking around at the expansive desert, at the small but resolute forces moving efficiently, cleaning up the aftermath. She thought of the men and women in the enemy camp, strategists, pilots, mercenaries, who had planned every angle, every missile, every ambush. They had tried to trap her in the sky, thinking it would be impossible to survive. Yet she had flown through fire and steel, guided by instinct, training, and an unbreakable will. As she walked, she felt a faint pulse of adrenaline still lingering. Every nerve in her body was alive, each wound a reminder of what she had endured. The Spartan had carried her through chaos, and now it lay silent behind her, a testament to both its resilience and her command. Inside the field hospital, medics worked swiftly. Cuts were cleaned, burns treated, bruises mapped and documented. Elisa endured each procedure with quiet strength. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the efficiency, the precision, the unspoken understanding that survival here was a team effort. It wasn't just about her skill. It was about the network of trust and training that surrounded her. Reed sat nearby, watching, still pale but composed. "You didn't even scream," he said. Elisa shook her head. "No point. Fear won't fix a plane with one engine, no hydraulics, and a canyon beneath it." She let herself lean back for a moment, catching her breath. Images of the ambush replayed in her mind. Missiles streaking past, insurgents on the cliffs, Falcon team jets tearing through the sky. The Spartan had been wounded, but together, it and she had survived. Together, they had turned the impossible into a story of triumph. Outside, Captain Morales approached again. "The report just came in," he said quietly. "Intelligence has identified the ambush coordinators. They underestimated you, and it cost them dearly. SEAL Air Command and Falcon Team tracked them. They're neutralized." Elisa's lips tightened. Justice, finally. But she didn't allow herself the luxury of celebration. "Not yet. Good. But this doesn't end here. They'll be replaced. Someone else will try. That's always the way." He nodded. "Which is why the SEALs exist. You've reminded everyone why we train, why we endure. You're more than a pilot, Commander. You're proof." Elisa looked down at her hands, scarred and blistered, then back at the horizon beyond the desert. She remembered the moments of terror, the spiraling missiles, the enemy jets, the firestorm in the canyon, and the deafening silence after the landing. And she knew, deep down, that she would fly again. Not because she wanted glory, but because survival and duty were inseparable. Later, as she stood outside the hospital, watching Falcon Team and her fellow SEALs coordinate cleanup and extraction, she allowed herself a brief smile. Reed beside her mirrored it. They had endured hell in the sky, survived impossible odds, and returned not just alive but unbroken. A reporter's voice crackled over comms. "Commander Brennan, any statement?" Elisa's gaze remained on the desert. Her voice was steady, controlled, yet carried the weight of every lesson learned. "Every plane has its limits," she said, "but every pilot has one more chance than you think. We survived because we refused to surrender. That's the lesson they should remember." Silence followed. Then the comms clicked off. Elisa didn't need applause or recognition. She had lived through hell and returned. That was enough. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the wrecked Spartan, Elisa Brennan felt something settle deep in her chest. A hard-earned calm, tempered by fire, chaos, and survival. She was battered but unbroken. The desert had tested her, the enemy had challenged her, and the sky itself had tried to take her. But she had flown through it all. The legend of Elisa Brennan, the Navy SEAL pilot who refused to fall, would spread quietly among her brothers and sisters in arms. Not in headlines, not in stories, but in whispered admiration and respect, the kind only earned in fire and steel. And somewhere, far from the desert, her enemies would learn the hardest truth of all. You cannot ambush a SEAL in the sky and survive to tell the tale. She turned to Reed, adjusting her uniform, despite the dust and blood. "Ready to fly again?" she asked, a faint smirk playing across her lips. He nodded. "If you're in the cockpit, always." Elisa allowed herself the tiniest laugh. The wind shifted, carrying away smoke and sand. The Spartan behind them would remain a scar on the desert, a testament to what had been endured and overcome. For Elisa Brennan, the desert, the ambush, and the death-defying flight were over. But the spirit that had carried her through would never fade. It belonged to the sky, to the SEALs, and to every challenge that dared to cross her path. The ultimate lesson was clear, simple, and terrifying for anyone who would face her again. You can try to break a Navy SEAL. You can try to ambush her. But you will not take her from the sky. With that, Alyssa Brennan walked toward the waiting Osprey, leaving behind the scarred fuselage, the echoes of battle, and the desert that had tested every limit. She had flown through hell and returned unbroken, undefeated, and unforgettable.